American exceptionalism. Some people believe it, some people don't. But what does American exceptionalism mean? The goal of my journey is to get past the buzzword and explore, what does American exceptionalism really mean? I'm Janine Turner. Join me as I speak with scholars and Americans all across the United States about what American exceptionalism means to them, both historically and currently. American exceptionalism, how and why it matters.
Today's show is about liberté, égalité, fraternité. It's well known, that saying, isn't it? But they also added the French ou la mort, which meant to the death at one point. This was the spirit of the French Revolution that quickly grew out of control. John Adams predicted this. The French were different than Americans. They had no religious tolerance. But in America, we have religious tolerance. There's no mandate here about what religion you have to be. Our religious freedom is an American exceptional quality. Today, we will discuss this and much more with our special guest, Eric Wise. Eric Wise is a partner at Alston and Bird, a scholar on our American founding, and a special guest essayist for Constituting America. So, Eric Wise, you're fascinating. It's fascinating to have a conversation with you. And thank you for writing 3 essays for us in this American exceptionalism study.
Oh, you're very welcome. What a pleasure.
And these interviews are really, this is the kind of thing I love, to have these discussions where we sort of philosophize. But it's a lost art believing that America is exceptional. Many people think America is not exceptional. And people who do believe America is exceptional, they don't really how to have that conversation, that sense of deliberation about, no, this is why. So because, we have 90-day studies at Constituting America, but it's 90 plus 90 equals 180. History holds the key to the future. It's the real title of it. Right. Because if you know about history, then you have the key to the future. And so it's important in these discussions that I think that we have tools in our toolbox about how to communicate. Well, no, we haven't been perfect. We've made a lot of mistakes. But America is exceptional, and these are the reasons. And I think one of the major reasons America is exceptional is from the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, that these documents have prevented us from falling into the mire of what everybody else around us has been dealing with over the past 200 years. And I love how our founding fathers said, okay, we don't want to fall into what happened in Greece or Rome or the Venice Republic, so we want to create documents that don't have these traps, but also look how our documents have kept us from falling into what happened, which we'll talk about today with Napoleon and the French Revolution, but also going down, Hitler, Stalin, Mao. It really has, you could even argue, even with the FDR phase, he was, even though government grew quite a bit, he was trying to protect, the democracy so that we didn't fall into what was happening in Russia and China and all around the world at that time, or fascism, or any of those things that were happening. And these documents have been exceptional in keeping us from falling into those traps. So, having said that, you wrote a fabulous essay for us on the French Revolution versus the American Revolution. So let's talk about that. And how did American exceptionalism, what aspects of American exceptionalism kept us from, when we had our revolution, not going the way of the bloody massacres and things that happened in France and during their revolution?
Sure. Well, on the surface, the French Revolution and the American Revolution are very similar, in the sense that the American Revolution starts with a pronouncement which begins with all men are created equal, and the French adopt as their slogan égalité, fraternité, liberté, probably not in that order. They also adopt at the end ou la mort, which is to the death, which they drop later. This is bad advertising.
Yeah, but nobody knows that.
The terror.
Thanks to you, we now know this. What is it? Liberty.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité, ou la mort.
Yeah, so no one knew it was liberty, equality, fraternity. Oh, and death.
Right. Right. Or death.
Or death.
Right.
So how interesting that they added. Why did they add death to that?
I don't know why they added it, but it was certainly part of the spirit of their revolution, and it quickly ran out of control.
Which John Adams predicted, and Thomas Jefferson was ooh la la about the whole thing, but John Adams said, this isn't going to be a good deal.
So, and the French were also, I think, as a matter of habit, different from the Americans. So the Americans had a long tradition of government by consent that extended before the American Revolution. Now, they were under the rule of the King in England, but many of their charters, starting with the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, had been adopted without an appeal to royal authority on the basis of scriptural interpretations that men were essentially equal and should be governed by consent. So when the Declaration of Independence came along, it wasn't like someone was proposing something new. And not everybody's a philosopher, and not everybody was reading Locke and Hobbes and other things. They were reading things like Thomas Paine, who was more commonsensical, based on the title alone, approach to self-government.
And they had their own town halls.
Yes.
They were actually living the experiment of self-government.
Exactly. So this seemed like natural to Americans to govern themselves this way. And they had over 100 years of history of doing it. Now, in France, France had a very difficult time with religious toleration, first of all. Many of their formative experiences were a function of expelling the Moors in the battle in the Loire Valley. And they had adopted a policy of tolerance towards their Protestant minority, the Huguenots, but revoked it.
Because they were primarily a Catholic.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So they were a small minority, but very productive and very important. They revoked it and ultimately expelled them around at the end of the 1600s.
The Catholics expelled the Protestants, or the government.
Really, the king exploited the
So are we
Protestants.
talking, is this Louis the 14th?
It was Louis the 14th.
Yeah,
yes.
the Sun King.
He revoked the Edict of Nantes and through the Edict of Fontainebleau, and tolerance was removed. Their schools were closed. Their churches knocked down, and most of them were expelled in a surprisingly short period of time. And this was done for a number of reasons, but largely because the French crown, which was very centralized around Versailles, had lost patience with the difficulty of centralizing the Huguenots. And from time to time, they aligned with foreign powers in conflicts. And so were considered probably unfairly to be unreliable because they also served the crown in a lot of different instances.
Two things. I think it could be argued that King Louis XIV, with all of his grand expenditures, drained the finances of the country, and everybody really resented that there was this grandeur of Versailles and the people were suffering. And then, by the time you get to Louis XVI, he really didn't have any money. And so the draining of those coffers sort of almost created the French Revolution in a way as well.
Right.
But when he kicked, why did he kick out the Protestants? What were they doing to make their lives difficult?
One, they were more successful financially than that created a lot of resentment.
With their own sense of self-government.
There were lingering questions about their loyalty. And the history of tolerance sprung from the St. Bartholomew's Massacre, which was really awful. The French attacked their Protestant neighbors in a very brutal St. Bartholomew's Day. I forget the exact date. But anyhow, the point of it was that there really wasn't any religious diversity in France. Right. And then the French Revolution had this theoretical founding. The leaders of it had a theoretical founding. They were both anti-royal and anti-clerical because the French king was supported by the church in the sense that the king was his divine right was also a function of his anointment.
So they went hand in hand.
they
If
went
you're going to
hand
get rid
in
of the
hand,
king, you've got to get rid
and-
of religion as well.
Yeah, so they basically knocked out several legs of the stool that held the culture together. And
Interestingly, in America, we did not get rid of religion.
no, and we had a diversity of religion. You know, Voltaire famously said about England that it was a country with 60 religions and one sauce, and France was a country of one religion and 60 sauces. And in the United States, that propensity of the English to multiply in their religions and their tendency towards sort of private religious zealotry, I guess you could call it, continued here in the United States. The United States was a religiously diverse country, and I think that contributed to, and also had a habit of self-government, which I think sprung to some degree from that religious diversity.
There wasn't a mandate on what type of religion you
Right.
had to be
Right.
in the federal government.
Right.
Right.
And people tolerated other people with some degrees of variation, even though they might have very different opinions about some very important matters having to do with religion.
So we could argue that our religious freedom is one of the American exceptional qualities.
Yes, I think we can argue and say with some confidence that it's very important to our ability to govern ourselves.
Interesting distinction, though. It doesn't say freedom from any religion. It doesn't mean you don't have to, that
it definitely does not say that.
Yeah, but people interpret it that way.
Yes, often people think that, but rationalism was not as great a part of the American founding as I think often people on all sides tend to see it. I think some people see the founding as very rational and focus on new rationalities and new ideologies,
reason,
as being
enlightenment,
necessary to replace those as sort of a
to replace religion. Are you saying?
No, to replace the rationalism of the Declaration of Independence with new forms of rationalism, as though the Declaration of Independence were just an expression of the rationalism of the time of Locke and Hobbes, which should be updated with the rationalism of the 20th century. Hegel, Marx, postmodernism, and that's a very American thing to do. I think that's an overemphasis on the rationalism of the Declaration and a misstatement of American exceptionalism. I think on other sides...
What do you think the statement of American exceptionalism is, what you're talking about?
So what's embodied in the Declaration. So
natural law? Are we talking about natural law right now?
I think natural law is in some ways overemphasized by others because I think sort of this fundamental habit of thinking about yourself without an appeal to a rational framework for self-government is actually very important. I think for example, the Declaration of Independence was adopted after a resolution declaring independence had already been adopted on July 2nd.
From Richard Henry Lee, Virginia.
Right, from Richard Henry Lee, the Lee Resolution. Now, I'm very much of the view that the Declaration is the important founding document between the two, but the fact is nobody questioned on July 2nd what was the ground of authority of their resolution to declare their independence. They thought they had to do it, and the
Their ground of authority was what?
I think the habit of thought that came down from Thomas Hooker and others, and was also influenced by Locke, Hobbes, Thomas Paine, but it wasn't simply an Enlightenment story. It was an American story about how people should govern themselves. And the Declaration is an articulation of that, which is very strong and very powerful. But the abstractions in the Declaration are only the very first part, right? All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. The rest is a practical statement of how that all works in application. And that was something that in the United States everyone already understood. Abroad, that was quite a mystery, right? Because every country of importance in Europe considered that the authority of government came from the divine right of kings. And so this was a rational repudiation of the divine right of kings. So that the thread of the Declaration gets picked up.
But they didn't have anything in France to replace that with.
No.
Really. It was the problem.
And they didn't have the cultural habits. People who had not governed themselves for a long time, when given the job of governing themselves, the first thing that seemed to have occurred to many of the key players in the French Revolution was to start killing their enemies, which turned out to be a less than satisfactory solution for them. Ultimately, they weren't able to maintain a stable government, and it collapsed first into a Bourbon Restoration, I believe, and then into was it Napoleon? I can't remember the order. But
right. Well, they had the guillotine and all the terrible things that happened during the French Revolution that because they didn't have the experience of governing themselves is probably one of the reasons.
But it ultimately collapsed into an imperial
power. I mean, and that's why I think America's exceptional, because we did not fall in. They came right back. Suddenly they have a dictator in Napoleon, and then after that they bring another king back.
Right.
It was all for nothing.
The Gettysburg Address, I think, is often not fully appreciated when Lincoln says that this struggle is to determine whether government by the people, for the people, and of the people shall not perish from the earth. And he also said whether a government so conceived can long endure. He was actually raising a critique of the American form of government. And that was, we're here to demonstrate whether or not a country that's founded on consent will simply disappear because people withdraw their consent and leave when they're disappointed in the results. Setting aside the horrible underlying issue that led to the disappointment, that led to secession. What Lincoln is questioning is whether or not any government that's not ruled or established on the principle of divine right of king can survive. And that's what he's saying, that the Civil War is there to demonstrate that it can be done. Because if it disappears, the whole world's going to say, you know, it's an interesting form of government, but it really doesn't work. Look what happened in France. They were very quickly back to a tyrannical approach to government under the monarchical rule. But the United States can continue to be based on consent. And I think that's exceptional the way Lincoln recognized it. And I think it's also interesting that in his articulation of it, we tend to focus very highly on his interest in the Declaration of Independence. And he does mention a lot in the principle of equality. But he also plays very strongly to some of the more, subconscious threads which drive consent in America. Many of his speeches are styled after the King James Bible, including the Gettysburg Address. And in his, it's the first inaugural, he appeals to the mystic chords and memories of Americans to hold them together. So he's not appealing simply to a rational principle, but to other cultural threads.
Mystic chord of memories?
Yes.
Is that a quote?
Yeah, there's a quote.
That's Abraham Lincoln's quote? Mystic chord of memories?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so that's referring to religion, to God,
partly,
to the goodness within people.
Partly, yes, to the religious practices.
And a higher purpose, right?
And
wouldn't that also be a higher purpose that we get from trying to serve someone besides ourselves?
Yes.
And you could argue that would be to a higher power, to God, would be the mystic what?
Chords of memory.
Mystic chords of memory. The innate within us is this call for a higher purpose and a higher goodness. And that's what he was always trying to inspire with those words then, correct?
Yes.
For the inner goodness of the people to do the right thing.
Right. He referred to the Declaration as the theoretical foundation, but he also appealed to many other aspects of the American character, which I think are very important in understanding that consent and that we're absent.
Did that keep us from falling into the way of France did because we had an innate goodness based on faith, whereas they were going away from faith. We were centered in the mystic. Well, I can't remember it. The mystic chords of memory. Mystic chords of memory. We were still in the mystic chords of memory, whereas the French Revolution, they were just doing away with that altogether. And that was one of the things that made us. I mean, of course, he wasn't alive. Well, the revolution was way before that in France. But I mean,
I would say that the French were probably culturally adrift at the time of their own revolution because they didn't have any habits of governing themselves. They didn't really know how to do it.
But what about the religious aspect? Because they were
had
really
a
attacking religion as well.
And they attacked.
They were getting rid of that
because the religion was identified with their oppressors.
But so they threw the baby out with the bathwater, though.
Yeah, to a large degree. It's difficult to say whether it was the French people or the people who managed to get control of the French Revolution. But it's clear, obviously, that their approach to it led to a bloodbath that was didn't produce the results that they wanted. They ultimately ended up under a fanatical tyranny led by Napoleon.
Because men are not angels was what James Madison said, in which our Constitution was trying to protect against that kind of, I guess you could call it, maniacal sort of evil. You know, they certainly weren't angels with what they were doing.
If you look in the Declaration of Independence as well, it refers to, in the closing, the good people of these colonies. And so one has to ask themselves, why did you mention that they were good people? And I think in part that's because it would have been understood if you asked Jefferson, could a bad people govern themselves?
We look at the French Revolution if we want to see that, right?
You would see that, exactly. And the answer he would have said is no, a bad people would do exactly what you don't want them to do, which is to form a majority and then oppress a minority with that majority, which is not self-government. That's just a tyranny by mob. I forget who said it, but he said that I would rather be governed by one tyrant 3,000 miles away than 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away. One of the founders said it.
So he was referring to Rome.
No, he was referring to the
French
King of
Revolution.
English is the one tyrant 3,000 miles away. And the 3,000...
Oh, the English. Okay,
right,
yeah.
And the 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away would be his own neighbors if they couldn't restrain themselves.
In anarchy.
Right.
In anarchy.
Or if they simply sought to appropriate for themselves, rights at the expense of other people. So,
yeah, now we're back to the whole majority-minority aspect.
Yes, right. Comes full circle. They're all interconnected. And I think the failure of the French Revolution has to do with both the practical circumstances of the substance of who were the French people at the time, and what habits did they have. And I think the proof is in the pudding that the habits worked very good. It took a while for the French to develop Republican habits.
And we go back to that liberty, fraternity, equality, le mort. However you want to say le mort, death. That's just really interesting. Well, I guess it could be a little bit like Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty, give me death." Is kind of what they were thinking, but I don't know what they were thinking because would that be a
yes? I think it's whoever came up with it probably thought it was a great little flourish.
Kind of like Patrick Henry,
and then someone got carried away,
and they took it literally.
Yeah.
Which, well, we had our own war, but it wasn't just this beheading. Kind of. I would call that anarchy. Is what ended up happening. So to wrap this up, when you compare our Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Federalist Papers, self-government experience, the goodness and innate goodness of the American people compared to with the French Revolution, what would be your American exceptionalism bullet points?
That the American people had certain habits that had been developed over more than a century. To contribute to their ability to govern themselves and to understand the Declaration and the Revolution in a way that would lead to their self-government by majorities that would be hesitant to invade the rights of minorities. And I think the distinction was that those habits didn't exist in France for a number of reasons that were not really in the control of the French. They came from policies that have been handed down from the crown. who knows whether in an alternate history the French Revolution could have been more like the American one. But what happened was it very quickly slid off the rails, and they came up with a fantastic slogan, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, and then they added the flourish of "ou la mort" and carried it too far.
Yeah, they sort of went. They had a power-hungry group of people, as you say, that the minority were terrorizing then their own people, the majority perhaps, with what they were trying to do. And we had, I think, one of the things that was exceptional about America was this sense of the citizen soldier, and that George Washington, after 8 years, sort of handed it back over, and didn't say, "I'm going to become the king now," which he could have. Probably if he wanted to be, because everybody there's a reverence for George Washington. But that was a great example set. So of George Washington to hand it back to the people and say, now we're going to do this transfer of power, which no one had they couldn't believe that this was actually happening. That then John Adams walks in and takes over, and George Washington just goes back, and no one had ever seen anything like that. So that's American exceptionalism.
Yes.
That we were blessed with not perfect. There were a lot of things we were doing wrong, but we were setting the foundation was being set that George Washington, in this respect, just handed everything back over and said, "It's the people's government."
Yes, it was very important that he did that, and he was very conscious of the fact that he had an enormous amount of control over American opinion, and so by doing that, he was making a demonstration that would actually tie up future leaders. It wasn't broken until Franklin Roosevelt decided to run for a third term, and then it became such a habit of Americans to think of a two-term president that they then adopted an amendment to prevent it from happening again.
And there we go with another American exceptional quality, which is the amendment process, which said we're gonna actually amend this charter and make it our own.
Right, and they still knew that they could do that, and they did it.
Yeah, they did it, which we need to do now.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.